Hello everybody, my name is Zen and welcome to GLHF episode number 19, the weekly show where we get to take a look at a variety of different games. For this episode we'll be taking a look at not one, but two games, Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2. We'll also be contrasting the difference between the two games to determine where Dragon Age 2 may have failed to live up to expectations, and what made Dragon Age Origins such a critically acclaimed title.
Look, can we talk for a moment? I need to tell you something. I should probably have told you earlier.
First, let's start off by describing what Dragon Age actually is for anyone who hasn't seen or played it. You see, Dragon Age as a whole is a universe developed by BioWare, set in your typical generic fantasy world. You got your elves, your dwarves, your dragons, the darkspawn, your evil baddies who want to destroy everything good in the world. The typical fantasy stuff. Where Dragon Age begins to differ from other fantasy worlds, though, is that it tends to be more dark and gritty. See, the Dragon Age universe is filled with a lot of segregation, racism, demons, and, to be honest, some pretty adult themes. Because of this, it really sets the tone for the game and later gives you some hard choices, some moral choices that you need to make. Like, do you kill a demon-possessed child, or do you sacrifice his mother to save him with the use of blood magic?
What is it, Mother? I can't see it well enough.
This is an elf, Connor. You've seen elves before. We have them here in the castle.
Oh, I remember. I had their ears cut off and fed to the dogs. The dogs chew for hours.
As far as the game mechanics are concerned, though, it's a third-person action RPG, a heavy RPG, that makes use of hotkeys, party members, and even things like strategic combat that is possible so you can issue orders around the battlefield. Combat as a whole tends to be a bit difficult, and it means that you really have to take advantage of pausing, moving your units about the battlefield or your party about the battlefield, and then making use of health potions and queuing up abilities. The game features a lot of very in-depth RPG mechanics like stat balancing, class customization, skill customization, and even gear management for yourself and your party members. Now, as far as your party is concerned, you gain access to basic class archetypes that you've come to expect in many MMO games. You get your basic tank companion, you got healers, you have damage dealers, and then you've even got some support things that you could do in between. Now let's focus in on Dragon Age Origins. So when you make your first character, you can choose your character's sex, your character's race, and your character's class. The races you have access to are the humans, the elves, and the dwarves. And as far as classes are concerned, you get a warrior, a mage, or a rogue. That may seem very limited, but later on in the game you get to specialize them on a bit more. And a rogue could be something like a bard, and a warrior can turn into something like a Templar. Now, the unique thing with Dragon Age Origins, though, is the ability to choose an origin story. These vary based upon what class and race you choose, and they give a unique introduction story to the game for your specific character. These will also change the way the rest of the game plays out for you. For example, if you choose a city elf, most people you interact with will probably treat you as scum and look down upon you. But in other cases, you could also choose something that is more of a nobility origin, and then people will look up to you and ask you for your advice. Now, when you combine these origin stories with your dialogue system from other BioWare RPGs, then you get these strange choices that you have to make later on, and the combination of the two can really change outcomes within the game.
Wake up, gentlemen! More travelers to attend to. Led by an elf, of all things.
They don't look much like them others, maybe we should just let these ones pass.
An amazing story actually overarches the entire game, and it's paired up with one of the most memorable cast of characters you'll ever meet. Because of this, you'll actually want to find out everything you can with each of the companions that you get. This is even more amplified by the fact that each of the companions has such a robust personality that it makes them feel more like a real person than it does a computer character.
Is my being upset so hard to understand? Have you never lost someone important to you? Just what would you do if your mother died?
Before or after I stopped laughing.
Right, very creepy. Forget I asked.
All of these things come together to make easily one of the best RPGs ever made. and it's a game that you'll probably end up coming back to even once you have finished it completely. It should be assumed in this case that Dragon Age 2 would also be as great, seeing as it's just the next iteration of such an amazing game, right? The problem is that it really isn't, and in fact it falls flat on its face in some areas. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game, and I must stress that. It just means that it doesn't live up to the legacy that Origins has left, and in fact it just is mediocre in comparison.
And just, what are you seeking?
The champion.
Which one?
You know exactly why I'm here. Time to start talking, dwarf. They tell me you're good at it.
What do you want to know?
Everything. Start at the beginning.
Now it's time to focus in on Dragon Age 2. So they moved the setting of the game from Ferelden, which is where the first game is set in, to Kirkwall, and that's a city far across the sea. Now the game originally starts in Ferelden, but your character and family are fleeing from the Darkspawn Blight. Now your mother ends up informing you that you have friends and family in Kirkwall and it should be a good place to flee. This all seems like a good idea, but the problem is that your slimy uncle actually has sold all the possessions of your noble family that you once had in Kirkwall to pay off some of his debts. Now, in Origins, you actually feel like you have a goal within the story. You become a Grey Warden, which is an organization that was formed long ago to defeat the Darkspawn. And then for the rest of the game, it's your goal to push back the encroaching Darkspawn Blight that is taking over. And you do this by gaining the support of several allies such as Elven and Dwarven armies. Now, in Dragon Age 2, it's a problem because your story isn't very heroic at all. In fact, it doesn't even involve the Darkspawn, and they're not even a part of it. Throughout the game, you're basically just trying to make a name for yourself. You're trying to rise out of the poverty that you have found yourself in. And sure, there's a big baddie at the end of the game to take down, but the problem is, by the middle of the game, you feel so disengaged from the story that you just don't even care when you finally face him. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want them to keep throwing Darkspawn at us in every iteration of the game. Yes, it's a cool enemy, but we would like some variation. I just don't think it was time for that variation in this game. There was still a lot to be explored within the Origins universe that they just didn't get to. Now, Dragon Age 2 doesn't actually have any memorable characters to speak of in the first place. Actually, I'm mistaken. There are two memorable characters.
Well, Lucky, I'll tell you what. Since the information you gave me was worth nothing, that's what I'll pay you.
Me and my boys will get our money's worth, bitch.
Oh, you poor sweet thing.
Now, at this point, you may be saying something like, well, Zen, the story's bad, but surely they haven't screwed with anything else. I mean, when they wouldn't try to fix what's not broken, right? Well, yes and no. Now, they tried to improve upon some of the weaknesses that Dragon Age Origins had, and in most cases they succeeded. But the really frustrating problem is that they also decided to change things that didn't need to be changed at all. Now, firstly, the combat in Dragon Age 2 is much better. It's a huge improvement. It's faster, it's more visceral, it's more responsive, it's less clunky. It's incredibly satisfying, and most of all, it is super fun. But the problem is, it's so easy. The first game was praised for its difficulty. It made the combat sequences incredibly tense because you would have to keep pausing the game, issuing certain ability orders, using health potions, moving your characters around strategically, just trying not to die. Now, in Dragon Age 2, you just simply slaughter mindlessly through waves of hordes of enemies that just appear out of nowhere, and even come from behind you, which allow them to kill your squishier party members without you being able to react. But the problem is, you don't really have to worry about all of that because your character plays like a demigod to begin with, so you just run over there and slaughter them. Dragon Age 2 does bring much needed improvements on graphical fidelity and visuals, though. It makes it much easier to look at as a whole, But some of the aesthetic choices that were changed are certainly questionable. They aren't bad, they're just really different than what we're used to seeing in the first game and what we're really attached to. One thing that they did do very well though was making the interface much more pretty, much more streamlined, and everything is really smooth in design. It makes navigating menus and issuing commands a pretty easy task, but once again they changed things that they just shouldn't have changed. They dumbed down the skill trees and tried to make some of the skills a bit more interesting choices to consider, I guess. Although this had an opposite effect. They also tried to streamline the inventory system, and these changes were nice, but what they did take away was the customization of your companions. Why would they do that? You can no longer fully equip your companions with items that you have found, and instead most of your companions just have certain packs of gear that you upgrade to make them better, but they just retain the visual looks. For me, part of the fun of upgrading items is seeing the different visuals that you get, getting variety in the way that your party looks, and now this is all gone. Yet another frustrating change is to the setting of the game. In Origins you had a world with many different areas to explore, like woodlands or dwarven cities, and in Dragon Age 2 it's much more limited to the city of Kirkwall. Although there are a couple times when you get to go out into the world, the problem is that these moments are so few and far between that you quickly get tired of seeing Kirkwall, considering you're in it for 90% of the game. This makes another consequence to another system in the game. It makes it so that most of the dungeons seem completely identical. You go into them 30 or 40 times it seems, and maybe it'll open up one new passage for a specific side quest. But it's never a big enough change to warrant using the same dungeon textures and models over and over to begin with. All of this begs to question why they thought changing so many things of an already really great game would make it any better. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We all appreciate the iteration that you try to do, but they just took it a step too far with the direction of Dragon Age 2.
We work together, you and I, and before you know it, you'll have all the capital you need. What do you say?
It's not like I had anything better planned.
Now, with all that said, let me clearly state again that Dragon Age 2 isn't a bad game. The combat is much more enjoyable than in Origins, and the streamlined UI makes wrestling with menus way easier, but it's all of the other unneeded changes that keep Dragon Age 2 from being a good game. It's not a bad game, but it's not a good game. If you didn't have Dragon Age Origins to compare it to, it may have ended up doing much better with critics. But because you had such a great game come before it, it just feels so mediocre. Luckily for those of us who are huge fans of the franchise though, there's some very good news for us. The developers have been releasing information regarding Dragon Age 3, and the first of this information is that many of the changes in Dragon Age 2 are going to be reverted, like the lack of companion customization. In fact, from the sounds of it, they're just going to take the good things from Origins, the good things from Dragon Age 2, and throw them coherently together. What this means is that we can expect a very fun and difficult combat system in Dragon Age 3, along with many RPG elements that we felt like were missing from 2, but were found in Origins. They also plan to make the game more open world, kinda like Skyrim. Now this could be a good or bad change, and I'm gonna wait to hold my opinions on it until I actually get more information later this year. Lastly, there's murmurings of them developing the game within the Forgelight 2 engine, which is going to mean that the game has spectacular visuals. There's also murmurings of there being multiplayer added to the game. Personally, I'd be fine with this, seeing as the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer turned out to be amazing. I'm sure they can make Dragon Age multiplayer modes just as satisfying, if not better. And if you're not convinced by that bit of news, the Dragon Age team actually has stopped development of the Dragon Age 2 expansion in order to focus their efforts on Dragon Age 3, seeing as it's going to be more widely accepted by the fans. And from the sound of things, they really want to do the game right by learning their lessons that they got from 2, and going back to the magic formula that they had found within Origins. If you're bored and looking for any game to play, look no further than Dragon Age Origins. Not only is it one of my favorite games I've ever played, but it's widely accepted as one of the best RPGs ever made. This game will certainly suck you in, and you'll want to come back several times after you've finished it because it is that good. If you haven't picked up Origins, also, there's no reason for you not to. It's at a very reasonable price point because it's an older game, and you'll end up getting more hours of fun out of it than almost any release in the past year. I would also openly suggest playing Dragon Age 2. You may not like it as much as the first game, but at least you get to go back into the world one more time and even familiarize yourself with some of the events that have happened within the universe just to prepare yourself for the release of Dragon Age 3, which is rumored to happen sometime next year. But on that note, please leave any feedback or responses in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.